Welcome to another episode of Life Distilled. I'm Kobe Williamson, founder of MicroShiner, and our co-host Ryan Hickey is tripping down to Colorado, so we had to get a pinch hitter Ryan in for us today. That's Ryan Montgomery, owner operator Montgomery Distillery. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, and first of all, we just wanted to say thank you for sponsoring us and allowing us to use this space. You give that to us at a pretty discounted price, so we really appreciate that. It's been working really well for us as a place to host the podcast and try to get the word out about small batch lifestyle, craft culture, and everything that everybody's doing around here.
We're happy to help.
Yeah. So I noticed you got a little something in front of you there.
Yeah, this is not made by us, but it's a Kettle House IPA, double hull IPA.
You were saying you ran downstairs, you were going to grab something.
Yeah. Well, we the Phillipsburg Brewery, which is nearby, it uses is in the process of using some of our ex-whiskey barrels for barrel aging their beer, and they brought us some free beer in exchange, and I was hoping that'd be down there, but like I said, free beer doesn't gather dust around here, so I couldn't find any.
The other thing I wanted to touch base on, all these motorcycles. So
yes.
What do you got going on here?
On the camera you can see this back room. When we got this space for a distillery, we had a large space for the tasting room upstairs, which was kind of too large. And so we had this unused space in the back, and it was just kind of gathering dust. The bar manager, Tad Hilton, and our head distiller, Chad Larrabee, and I each got some crappy old motorcycles with the idea of fixing them up and learning how to become motorcycle mechanics. We haven't quite got there yet, but that kind of turned this back space into a motorcycle shop and amateur shade tree motorcycle shop. And since then, we've gotten about, probably 6 other employees interested in riding. So we go out on distillery rides and wrench back here in the winter time. And we've got a little yellow one. You can see it on the camera back here. That's kind of the distillery town runabout and learner bike. So if anyone's interested in learning how to ride that works here, they can borrow that and destroy it if they want to. It's got a kind of a cheap Chinese knockoff engine in it.
Gotcha.
And a small frame. It's easy to ride.
Right.
It's like a bicycle with a 125cc engine in it, which is nice.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I've been here for your Father's Day show. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're still doing that.
We are, yeah.
2 years ago I was here. Spirits and Spokes, is that what it is?
Yep, that's right. We do it every Father's Day. We clear out all the tables and chairs in the tasting room and fill it with vintage and interesting local motorcycles. There's usually a long list of people locally who want to bring their bikes in. And people brought bikes down from Kalispell and up from Bozeman and Helena. So we've got a pretty good showing every summer, and yeah, it's a fun thing to do. To get all these nice bikes out of people's garages and have people look at them. So it's fun.
Yeah, some of them look like they didn't routinely get ridden. They kind of just hide out.
Right, some of them, yeah. Some of them, surprisingly, some of the most, expensive ones get ridden all the time.
Oh, yeah.
You wouldn't think so, but yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
make use of these things.
Right.
So you own Montgomery Distillery.
I do.
I've been really looking forward to getting you on the program. One, because you're hosting us and sponsoring us. So we wanted to do that, but then also because I've always kind of considered you the epitome or the archetype of a craft distiller or a micro distiller, in my opinion.
Thank you.
And I wanted to get the opportunity here to really test that and kind of truth my assumptions about what you're doing and whether that kind of meets the criteria that I've set for what I think a craft distiller or a micro distiller is. So I'm super excited about that. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you a question because what first drew me to Montgomery Distillery, other than it was right in my backyard and I've had the opportunity to come, and what got me into micro distilling in the first place really was more so than craft beer, because there's some of this in craft beer, but it's a kind of a different animal, is you guys have such attention to detail. Mm-hmm. Most of the top operations, like the attention to detail is off the charts.
Right.
So like where did you get your eye for design? Like say the Spirits and Spokes flyer is.
Right.
And everything that you've done, I just always find that there's sort of this, like the motorcycles. You have an eye for design as much as anything, it seems.
Well, I can't take most of the credit for that. My wife's got the eye for a lot of our design, and we've been really lucky in finding great designers for our spirits packaging and motorcycles and whatnot. But I think I can tell what looks good and what doesn't look good, and I know what I like. But it's really difficult to translate that into direction for someone. You know, this is saying this is what I want it to look like and have that vision come out is harder than saying, oh, I like that idea. You know, so I'm kind of on the I like that idea into the spectrum. I'd say my wife, and then you know, she's got the eye and the attention to detail, and she really goes through all of our designs and makes little tweaks and has a vision of what she wants it to look like. So she's the kind of the design maven here, and then we just run everything past our staff. We got a really eclectic, well-educated, and just smart staff that work for us. Folks that work here, and we run everything by them for their thoughts and ideas, and then just kind of have an outside group of friends and other business owners in town that we can run things by too. But I can take less than 5% credit for that. So
yeah, well, you know, I mean, obviously the whole team. I don't know how you guys are organized, but you're sort of the head of the dragon or the head of the hydra. So
right.
I do think there's some leadership involved there that creates the environment that allows these things to
Right.
come to fruition. And
Yeah.
I certainly see it in almost everything that you do, and I've always been a fan. It's what really, like I said, it's what really intrigued me about craft spirits or micro distilling in the first place, because this whole idea of distilling, it's such a great analogy. It's such a metaphor for everything.
Right.
And I mean, just with all the rest of your products and things that you do, I just had noticed from the beginning, all these distillers are they're distilling down their lives into these important things, you know,
Right.
whatever it is, you know, motorcycles, you know, their whiskey or whatever it is they're trying to get into. They've taken this thing that now they're making a livelihood, and they're also using it as a metaphor, and they're using it to create this thing. And that's why we wanted to call this Life Distilled, because our hope is that everybody will take that as a lesson and say, well, okay, where can I trim the fat? You know,
Right.
how can I
Right.
cut out some of this noise?
Or what's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
exactly it. So you started this place, when was that?
2012.
2012.
Yeah.
And
So
what
5
got
years
you
ago.
into it?
Kind of a variety of things. The idea came to us, we were living overseas, my wife and I, and we really wanted an excuse to move back to Montana. And the profession that I was in and she was in didn't lend itself to that at all, and it lent itself to being where we were at. And so we'd always kick around ideas of how we could get back here, basically get back in the mountains. And it kind of parallel to that, I was a home brewer and started getting into home brewing, and I was traveling a lot and visiting, you know, when I was traveling throughout Europe or whatever, I'd visit breweries and kind of see their operations and what they were doing. And I visited a small distillery in Germany one time, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I didn't know this could be done on a small scale. And they were making whiskey, which also kind of surprised me, a German distiller making whiskey. I'd never heard of that before. And then the scale kind of intrigued me as well, because I'd always thought, you know, I was home brewing and I wanted to move back to Montana, and I was thinking, well, maybe brewing's the way. I enjoy it. I enjoy working with my hands. But this kind of popped the idea in my mind of, well, maybe distilling could be done the same way on a small craft level. And just started reading as much as I could, and then visiting as many distilleries as I could, talking to people. And the idea kind of formed as a kind of a wish, you know, not necessarily in reality at that point. And then there was some medical issues in my family. My son was born, he had some medical issues, and we had to move back to the U.S. And that just kind of set everything in motion. And we thought, well, what's, you know, going back to what you said, like, what's important to us? You know, now we've got this little life in our hands, and we wanted to raise him in a place like Montana and a place like Missoula, and I wanted to do some profession that I really enjoyed and could take pride in. And not that I didn't enjoy what I was doing, but making something. I wanted to make
Right.
something, and So that all just kind of came together, and it's like a lot of times when you have good ideas or ideas that I guess are meant for you, things just seem to happen easily when you're going in that direction. When you're going in a direction that's not meant for you, sometimes things seem to be harder. And when I started going in this direction, things just started popping up. Like this building that we're in is a great location. It's a great old building, and it just kind of popped on the market right when we were looking for a place, and it was
interesting,
doable for us, And so things like that just happen along the way. You mentioned our design. So our first kind of batch of label design, we used a place based out of London called Stranger and Stranger. Amazing design. They do a lot of Scotch whiskey labels, beer and wine, and they're like kind of the top designer in the world for spirits, beer and wine. They won all the awards. And we thought when we went to design our labels, we thought, well, let's just ask them,
Right.
The worst they're going to say is no. And then we can just move on from there to see who we want to get. And they said yes, and they gave us a great price because they kind of liked our idea, and they liked working with a small distiller rather than big distillers all the time. So they kind of gave us a shot and knocked it out of the ballpark for us. But that's just one example. Things just kind of working our way. Of course, they said, well, if you want to do another label, it's going to cost the regular price, and we haven't been able to afford that yet. But they really helped us out. We just encountered a lot of that as we kind of got it started. So, and my wife and I, we kind of met and courted over drinking scotch, and that was kind of our thing to begin with. And we've always been big fans of Scotch whiskey, and that was kind of part of the dream too, was to make a single malt.
You had told me that in the beginning that a single malt whiskey was kind of where you were headed, and sort of like the pie in the sky, goal in the end. What are you making now? What are the products you got in Montgomery?
We have vodka and gin. Those are the two products we started with. We have aquavit. We have two different types of aquavit, which is a Scandinavian spirit, flavored primarily by caraway. We have an unaged and an aged version of those. We have a straight rye whiskey called Sudden Wisdom, and we have our single malt, which this last release it's a 4-year-old single malt, and keeps getting better. But we're only releasing that once a year, just trying to age out our stock. So we release a very small percentage of the barrels that we make in any given year, and over time that'll age itself out. It's all about time. And then we just came out. Well, we've been out with it for a while. We just kind of came out with or upped our production of a coffee liqueur that we've been making for a number of years, just for the tasting room. But we decided to kind of spread that out. It's a pain in the ass to make. That's why we've just made it for our tasting room. It's delicious. But it's not easy to make. We team with a local coffee roaster here in Missoula, and use their coffee in the coffee liqueur, and it's a laborious process. But we've scaled it up enough to where we think we can meet the demand, at least in Montana, and have that out there. But we're kind of half hoping it doesn't take off. It's delicious. But when you got to make it, you're like, well, this is good, but let's not let too many people know about it.
Right. Well, we were in here, and Jacob showed us the Kirschwasser.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And that sounded like that was a labor-intensive operation as well.
And that's definitely just a tasting room offering, because that's even more of a pain in the ass. But it's fun. It's a fun process. It's a 2-year-old Kirschwasser that we make. There's a lake just north of here that has a microclimate that grows cherries, flathead on Flathead Lake. And we have a friend who owns an orchard up there. So we go up there once a summer and pick up a bunch of cherries. Well, they pick them. But we get about 6,000 pounds of cherries. Take them to, we rent a pinning machine. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it'd take forever. But we take them to run a penny machine, pit them all, and make a cherry wine out of them, and then distill the wine. So the interesting part of that, one of the interesting parts of that, is that the pits in the cherries contain arsenic. So you don't want to break those pits. So if you crush the pits, it'll release all this arsenic, which is not good. But if you can ferment and distill with the pits in there, it'll give it a nice, almost like almond or marzipan flavor to the cherry. So we do that, but we can't run them through our pump because that'll crush them.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things about being a craft distiller is you get the agility to do things like that,
right,
and sort of hop around and try things out, and if it doesn't work out, you just don't ever do it again.
Right. Yeah, we can experiment on a small scale. And one of the reasons we do the Kirschwasser in particular is kind of, to like flex our distilling muscles a little bit. When you have like a good vodka and a good gin, and you make those for 4 years or 3 years, it's nice to challenge yourself a little bit and try something difficult. And cherry brandy is difficult for us. It's there's a lot of people that do it well, but it is kind of a difficult process.
Yeah. So you've got the whiskey now, though.
Mm-hmm.
And you said there's a single malt and then there's a rye.
Mm-hmm.
How far out are you reaching with that? Can people get that?
Yeah. So the rye is available in multiple states. Let's see, besides Montana, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Massachusetts, Maryland, District of Columbia, Tennessee, and then soon Colorado, North Dakota, and California.
Very cool.
Those are on the horizon. So.
Yeah. And then is that the same for the single malt, or is that a little more
limited? The single malt's more limited. I think that's just available in Washington State and Oregon, outside of Montana. Yeah.
Nice. That's something that I find interesting. As all those bottles get on the shelves with everybody coming out, how are people going to find this stuff and discover it? And is it just going to get to a point where everybody just tries one bottle and then never gets another one again?
Right.
Or, are there going to be, Montgomery Distillery whiskey drinkers like there are Maker Mark guys?
Yeah. Let's hope so. And I think there are, but I can't say I've cracked the code on how to do that. I'm not a marketing genius, and a lot of our success has been down to word of mouth and people trying it and liking it and continuing to drink it. But it's difficult. There's not only a large selection of corporate liquors out there. There's a large selection of craft liquors out there too, and there's a ton that are excellent.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of good spirits to choose from, and I think this craft distilling's impact on kind of big distilling has kind of been what craft brewing's impact on big brewing was. That it just ups the quality game. I'm not every craft distiller is great quality, but it has pushed the bigger guys to be more innovative, I think, and that's great for consumers. But it's difficult for us. It's difficult for a small craft distillery, especially someone from Western Montana that's trying to get on a shelf in Los Angeles to get somebody to buy it and repeat buy it. That's a difficult proposition, and I can't say we've cracked it. Well, other than throwing money at the problem. It's difficult to crack.
So I always like to think that when somebody's looking at a bottle on the shelf or at the bar or what have you, there's the experimental, the exploratory part of it. Well, I've never seen that before. Maybe I'll try it.
Right.
But then there's also, what is your value proposition in that? What do you think that you're offering that person? What does Montgomery Distillery products offer that person that some other bottle right next to it might not offer them?
Right.
Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, the number one thing has to be taste.
Uh-huh.
It has to be taste, and flavor is the number one thing that the best taste and flavor we can make is the number one thing we're shooting for. Because everything else is secondary to that. The packaging is secondary to that. Your story is secondary to that. You can have a great story and great packaging, but if it tastes terrible, you're going to sell one bottle and it's not going to get drunk. There's going to be a lot of it left on someone's shelves for the next 20 years. So flavor and taste is the number one thing, and that depends on the product. Of what you're shooting for, whether it's a clear, clean vodka, or a gin that has a flavor profile that you're shooting for and can hit, or whether it's whiskey that's aged properly and can stand up to other whiskeys. But flavor is the number one. And then I'd say our value proposition after that is our story and is our process, essentially. We have a distillery farm in central Montana where we grow the vast majority of our grain. The only grain we don't grow there that we use is our malted barley for our single malt, because we don't have a malting facility there.
Mm-hmm.
But we control the process from the ground to the bottle, and that allows us to do a lot of different things. I mean, on the farm, we experiment with different varietals. We haven't actually incorporated any new varietals yet, but we're experimenting with them to see if any different like rye varietals in particular is going to make a better whiskey or a better tasting whiskey. And then all the way to aging, using different wood profiles, different barreling techniques, and different cuts in distilling. So I think our process is what makes the flavor too, you know. So everything's kind of informed or directed by the flavor, and that's why we grow our own grain. That's why we make the cuts we do. That's why we do the barreling process that we do. Is all for flavor. Mm-hmm. So that's got to be our number one value proposition. If we don't have a good tasting product, then we're not doing it right.
Well, you could just go to MGP and you could get the perfect flavor.
I gotta say, it's good tasting.
Every day out of the box. Mm-hmm. So I do think that there are some other value propositions in there that, as you said, once you have the flavor nailed, mm-hmm. that's where the competition starts to happen. Mm-hmm. And I think in spirits, more so than craft beer probably, that starting point isn't as broad, right? So there was a lot of bad beer, and so it was easy to make lots of good beer.
Right.
Well, there's lots of good spirits, and because you distilled it, I think you got narrow room to work in.
Exactly.
Right? That margin is slimmer. So once you get that part right, and there's some spectrum there obviously, and depending on where you're at, if you're in the good flavor spectrum, part of the spectrum, depending on where you land in there, then from there it starts to become the question. Okay, do you do the whole process under one roof?
Right.
Maybe I'm into that. Maybe I want to support that.
Yeah.
Do you work with local farmers to get the grain, or do you just look on the internet, grain.com, and order up whatever it seems to meet your bill?
And honestly, that works great in Montana. It works great that we use all Montana grain, our own grain. We, a lot of our suppliers are from Montana. We give our stillage to local farmers. We support a lot of people in our community. That's that doesn't make a difference to someone who's buying a bottle in Los Angeles. They don't care, and I don't blame them. It's not their community that's being served. So for that community aspect, is geographically limited when you're trying to sell stuff. So I have a lot of respect for their distillers at MGP. They make excellent whiskey, and they're very highly qualified, and they make good stuff, and they age it well, and they know what they're doing. If you're looking for a bourbon, you're going to find as good a bourbon there as you will in Kentucky. In Lawrenceburg, Indiana, that's where they're based out of. But their business model is to supply. They don't sell to the public, and their business model is to supply other distilleries with whiskey and other things, but primarily whiskey. So you have an industry of craft distillers who purchase whiskey from this company or others, bottle it, and then sell it. Some of them are very upfront about it not being theirs, and some of them aren't. And at the beginning, it's funny because it's kind of in the beginning it used to bother me a lot because for the first 3 years we just had unaged spirits. We just had vodka, gin, and aquavit.
You bet.
And it's difficult. And we were spending about 30% of our production on whiskey, and putting it in barrels and aging it. So that's 30% that we're not seeing any revenue off of, which is kind of how you got to do it if you're going to start a whiskey distillery. So it bugged me a lot because we're barely breaking even, you know, and financially it was very difficult. And at the same time, there's distilleries selling the shit out of whiskey that they're not making, you know,
Right.
and it's not apparent to the consumer how hard it is to do yourself and how easy that is to do.
Absolutely.
And the difference therein. But now that we have our whiskey out, I care a little bit less because I'm not so worried about, you know, the financial part of it.
Right.
And also, I mean, I can shout until I'm blue in the face that this is the way it is, and I'm not sure it'll make a difference. And I'll just come off like a, you know, cranky asshole. So I've kind of made my peace with that. That's going to happen. I'm not going to be able to stop it. And the only thing I can control is my own product and my own process and the quality of that. And if, you know, if consumers in general become aware of that, that's good. But I'm not going to be the itinerant preacher that's going to travel the countryside telling people about this. You know, that's not my job. My job is to make the best whiskey, the best gin I can make, not to tell people what they should be drinking. And it's good stuff. It's good stuff. I mean, I would, my consumer advice would be, if you like that stuff, go buy bullet bourbon because it's cheaper and it's the same stuff.
Right.
Or, you know, another version of it that's a little bit cheaper that you're not paying for the packaging costs of some craft distillery. That'd be my consumer advice. It's good stuff though. I think I like it. You know, I like the bourbon. That's one reason that we haven't made bourbon. Is that the market was so flooded with sourced bourbon in the craft world that we went with single malt and rye because it's a little bit more difficult to source, and I like single malt the best, you know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we went for. But we try to hit something that's not easily sourced. Now rye is getting to the point where it's more easily sourced. But yeah. Anyways.
Well, you're fortunate that you don't have to be that itinerant preacher because the world has Life Distilled and the MicroShiner
Right,
guys
right.
because that is our mission.
Right.
And it's for some other reasons than people might recognize in the very beginning, largely because we want to see that production capacity and that revenue distributed across the landscape because we think that makes things better for small communities everywhere.
Right.
If they have a distillery in their town and they have a business in their town versus using oil to ship all the grain to this place, make all
Right.
the whiskey and ship all the whiskey back.
Right.
I don't think that's as good a model, so that's why we're there. But the real thing that I jump on right away with the contract whiskey is, if it all comes from MGP, why would you need 50 different labels? That's
Right.
just confusing people.
Right.
Why not? They're just go out and buy some Lewis and Clark for that. I mean, why even buy Bullet?
Right.
You know,
Right.
Bullet. You're just going to pay a little extra for the marketing package on Bullet or
Right.
Templeton Rye or one of the other ones that
Right.
are doing this exact same thing. And when really you're getting the same whiskey, so we can narrow all that down just to one.
Right.
And in the end, maybe MGP will just put their bottle up on the shelf and say 1995.
I would imagine someday that they're going to just come out with their own label. I don't know, but that would be my plan if I was them. They're great distillers. You know, they should be making their own product
Yeah,
and selling it to the consumers. But
yeah.
they're not going to listen to me. Why would they? They're doing great by themselves.
They're doing really well. Their
Yeah.
stock price is through the roof.
Yeah.
They got a lot of customers right
Yeah.
now. Everything's working out. I do think that the consumers are going to wisen up over time and realize that there is a difference, not just in the craft ranks, but between, why am I paying craft prices for commodity bourbon?
Right.
Because it just doesn't make sense in the long term. I wanted to circle back a little bit. You were talking about scale because, again, another place where you can check me if I'm wrong and we'll test how I imagine my worldview on this. I think when we first spoke, you had told me that when you designed the business plan and you were sitting down and mapping this thing out before you guys ever even started it up, that you had set a natural limit to your scale. You were like, if I can just get on the bar in all of Montana, that's gonna, with my clear spirits, that's gonna allow me to keep the doors open, and then I'm going to make whiskey, and that's going to be my profit.
Right.
That's how I kind of planned this thing out.
Right.
Is that true? And if so, where are you at with all that now?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's kind of how it's panned out over time. It's been a little bit. There's been some differences here and there as to what I expected, but it's pretty much gone as I had expected it to go in terms of breaking even on the clear spirits until our whiskey's out, and then that's when we become a profitable company, which has happened that way. And then as far as like expansion goes, if that's your question, like what's our limit? You know,
yeah.
It's a good question. I don't spend a ton of time thinking about it. I mean, I'd like to get. I'd be happy to get to the point where all of my employees are paid well, and they all have health insurance, and I'm paid well, and we have a good little business here. Whether that means we're in all 50 states or we're in 5, that doesn't really matter. You know, just as when we hit that point, I'll be happy. Now, if we have other opportunities and we're able to expand, and we can, you know, have a bigger distillery with wonderful, nice stills, and we can do things like, you know, there was a rough stock distillery that was in Bozeman. They had Oregon pine washbacks, which is like how they do in Scotland, which I really coveted because that's so cool. I'd love to do that, you know, and that costs money to do something like that, you know. But my model is like if you go to Belgium and you visit old Belgian breweries, they've been doing the same thing forever. They make, you know, some of the best beers on the planet, and they're not huge. They haven't become an Anheuser-Busch in the course of 300 years. They've pretty much stayed the same in 300 years. But they're making enough money to support themselves and their families and their employees, and they make a great product and everybody wants it. I'd rather be in that position, quite honestly, than be really big and be in 50 states and have everybody know my name. You know, I'd rather just make a great product that people appreciate, and you know, have enough to have a comfortable life for my family and the families that work here. That's my goal. Anything on top of that is gravy, but we're not there yet, you know. But that's the goal.